Hey guys, tonight we are standing at the edge of the desert, just outside the ancient city of Memphis, in the land of Egypt. The sun has long since sunk behind the horizon, but the stones and sand still radiate the heat of the day. You can almost feel the weight of history pressing against your shoulders as you gaze across the vast plateau of Giza. Three enormous triangles of stone rise out of the shimmering night air, their edges catching the silver glow of the moon, the pyramids. Silent, immovable, and more stubborn than your cat when you try to move it off the couch. They've been here for more than 4,000 years, watching empires rise and fall. While we still argue about the best way to cook pasta, so, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in tonight, drop your location and your local time in the comments. Love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The desert around you is quiet, but not empty. Wind slides over the plateau, dragging faint grains of sand across your ankles. The pyramids, though massive, don't seem like ordinary piles of stone. They feel alive like mountains built with intention. You probably won't survive the building process we're about to relive, but hey, that's why we're doing this in the comfort of storytelling instead of hauling actual rocks. Tonight, you'll walk step by step through the world of the builders, and maybe, just maybe, you'll leave with a clearer sense of how human hands could raise monuments that look like they were dropped from the stars. You begin to walk closer. The Great Pyramid of Khufu towers ahead of Uwarj Nili, 146 meters tall. Though time has shaved it down a little. Even so, it is still the largest of the pyramids, its limestone blocks stacked in near-perfect alignment. Mainstream history tells us it was built around 2560 BCE during Egypt's Old Kingdom, in the 4th dynasty, at the height of pharaonic power. And here's the kicker. Over 2.3 million blocks of stone went into this single structure, some weighing over 70 tons. It's the sort of number that makes your brain file for early retirement. The first sensation you get is scale. Every block, stacked neatly, was cut and dragged into place without steel, without wheels, without cranes. Just ropes, sledges, muscle, and a whole lot of beer. Yes, beer. Archaeologists found evidence that workers were often paid in liquid wages: bread, onions, and a daily ration of beer. Think of it as history's first work hard, play hard package deal. The moonlight glints off the weathered limestone, CASING stones at the pyramid's base. Once, the whole thing would have gleamed brilliant white, polished, smooth, reflecting sunlight so powerfully that sailors far down the Nile could see it glimmer. Imagine the desert sun striking those mirrored faces. You'd probably need ancient Egyptian sunglasses, maybe made of thin reeds or smoked glass. Historians still argue whether such reflective intensity was intended to blind enemies or simply to announce, in the loudest possible architectural voice, the pharaoh is basically immortal, and your mud hut will never compare. As you circle the pyramid, your sandals scuff against stones that once held scaffolding and ramps. The air tastes faintly metallic like dust laced with copper. The tools of the workers echo in your imagination. Copper chisels biting into limestone, dolerite pounding balls smashing harder granite, ropes creaking under strain. The sheer noise of construction would have carried across the desert like an industrial symphony. Forget lo-fi beats. Sued have had clanging stone percussion, chants, and maybe the occasional argument about which direction was actually north. Speaking of north, one of the strangest facts is how accurately the Great Pyramid aligns to the cardinal directions. Its sides are oriented almost perfectly north, south, east, and west, deviating only by a tiny fraction of a degree. That's better than some modern builders with GPS. How did they do it? Some say they used the stars maybe, circling the pole star with a sighting instrument made from wood and string. Others think they tracked the sun's shadow with a simple stick. Either way, it suggests a mastery of observation and geometry that makes you feel a bit silly for needing Google Maps to find the grocery store. You glance upward. The tip of the pyramid once held a gleaming capstone, possibly plated with gold, now long gone. Some legends whisper it was stolen. Others imagine it deliberately removed to prevent enemies from channeling its power. It's easy to see why myths sprouted like desert weeds. When you stand in front of something that massive, logic wobbles a little. Some fringe thinkers even propose alien architects, as if humans weren't clever enough. But the more you walk here, the more you feel the sweat, the strain, and the stubborn persistence of human hands behind every block. You notice shadows moving along the edges of the plateau. In your mind's eye, they become the builders themselves, rows of men pulling ropes, overseers shouting encouragement and probably insults, women carrying baskets of bread, children running between huts. The workforce wasn't just a faceless horde of slaves, as people once believed. Excavations at the nearby workers' village show organized communities, barracks, bakeries, breweries, even medical facilities. These weren't whipped masses, they were skilled laborers, farmers drafted during the flood season, ordinary Egyptians doing extraordinary things for the glory of their pharaoh. And yes, still arguing over who had the last beer ration. As you pause, the night deepens. Stars wheel above the desert sky, thousands of them, glittering, sharp, and cold. The pyramids seem to stretch toward them, as though stone itself could form a bridge between earth and heavens. In fact, some scholars believe the pyramids were deliberately aligned with constellations like Orion, symbolic of the god Osiris. Others say it's coincidence that we humans love seeing patterns. Historians still argue whether these alignments were intentional masterstrokes or happy accidents. But under this sky, intent hardly matters. The sensation is undeniable. You stand at a cosmic crossroads. The air grows cooler. The sand shifts under your feet. You tilt your head back and try to imagine it: the decades of labor, the countless hands, the measured geometry, the communal effort. You hear the faintest echo of copper on stone, of ropes straining, of human breath merging into something greater. It's not aliens, it's not magic. It's persistence, planning, and vision stretched across generations. That's the real miracle, the human will to shape the impossible. And so, beneath this endless sky, the pyramids stand not as mysteries waiting for extraterrestrial answers, but as reminders that human ambition, once set in stone, can last longer than the empires it served. You let the thought linger like the cool night air, and you keep walking deeper into the world of the builders. You leave the plateau behind for a moment and follow the dark line of the Nile as it winds like a giant black snake through the desert. Its waters gleam faintly under the moonlight, carrying the faint scent of silt and reeds. Without the river, there would be no pyramids. Egypt itself was born from this artery, and the blocks that make up those colossal tombs began their journey here. Floating like stubborn, stone-encased passengers on barges, you walk along the embankment, the night air damp and heavy compared to the dryness of the plateau. Papyrus rustles, and frogs croak lazily in the reeds. In your imagination, you see enormous blocks of limestone stacked onto wooden boats, tied together with ropes as thick as your arm. The men guiding them grunt with the strain of poles and steering oars, while the current nudges everything downstream. There's something absurd about its tons of rock floating on water like a prehistoric Amazon delivery. And yet, that's exactly how it worked. Mainstream historians explain that the limestone used for most of the pyramids came from nearby quarries. At Torah and Giza itself, easy enough to cart across short distances. But the granite used for inner chambers those intimidating red blocks that weigh as much as 50 family cars came from far away. All the way in Aswan, some 500 miles upriver. Imagine being the poor guy told, "Yeah, just get that block." On the boat, sail it hundreds of miles and don't drop it. If one of those slipped, you weren't just fired, you were probably swimming with crocodiles before the end of the day. The barges themselves were clever pieces of engineering. Archaeologists studying ship remnants at sites like Dashur found evidence of planked wooden hulls held tight with rope lashings instead of nails. They were flexible, able to shift with the water's pressure rather than crack. Some scholars even argue that entire fleets were built for the Pyramid Project alone, their only job being to ferry stone from quarries to construction ramps. Historians still argue whether the largest granite blocks required double barges lashed together or specially designed hulls. Either way, the Nile became less a peaceful river and more a conveyor belt of eternity. As you walk along, you pass ghostly shapes of dockyards. Excavations at Wadi al-Jarf have revealed the world's oldest known harbor, dating to Khufu's reign, with papyri describing workers transporting limestone from Tura. On those ancient scraps of writing, you can still read the names of crews and overseers, little fragments of bureaucratic life preserved like a time capsule. Imagine being an Egyptian scribe jotting down logistics about who carried how many stones, never realizing his notebook would one day blow historians' minds. The river carried more than stone: cedar wood from Lebanon, copper from Sinai, alabaster from Hatnabal flowed along this watery highway. You watch, in your mind's eye, as sleek ships arrive laden with timber, a rare luxury in Egypt's treeless landscape. The scent of pine and resin fills the air. Standing out against the muddy sweetness of the Nile, traders shout in foreign tongues, bringing not just materials, but ideas, weaving Egypt into a larger web of the ancient world. Still, not everything floated smoothly. You picture a storm whipping the water, capsizing a barge, thousands of hours of labor sinking in seconds. Did crews dive frantically to salvage? Did overseers gnash their teeth, terrified of facing their superiors? Well, maybe they just poured another beer ration and muttered, "Not my fault." Historians still argue whether stone transport was more reliable during flood season, when water levels rose, or whether that just made navigation even more dangerous. Either way, it was a gamble, one that had to pay off, because without the river, the pyramids would have been stranded dreams. You continue walking, hearing the slap of water against imaginary wooden hulls. Torches glow on deck, casting long shadows as men steer barges toward canals cut into the desert itself. Yes, canals. Evidence suggests Egyptians dug waterways to bring boats directly closer to the construction sites. That means when you stand near the pyramids today, picturing them surrounded only by sand, you're missing the water that once snaked right to their foundations. It's almost comforting to think that those massive stones didn't have to be dragged all the way from the Nile's edge. They floated part of the way like VIP passengers. And here's a quirky tidbit for you. Ancient Egyptians may have known a trick to make hauling easier, even on land. Scientists have found depictions of workers pouring water in front of sledges. Turns out, a little water reduced friction in the sand by as much as half. That's right, history's greatest architectural project might have been solved with the ancient equivalent of just add water. Somewhere out there, an overseer probably yelled, "Don't forget the bucket." While half the crew rolled their eyes, the night grows quieter as you stand by the riverbank. The frogs fade, replaced by the distant whisper of wind in palm fronds. The barges drift on in your mind, carrying their burdens toward the glowing plateau. Each stone is not just rock, it is time, labor, and belief set afloat, heading toward a destiny carved in limestone. You realize that this journey, as tedious as it may sound, was the lifeline of the Pyramid Project. The river wasn't just water, it was the bloodstream of a civilization. You step away from the Nile and glance back toward the plateau where the pyramids rise. Faint silhouettes under the stars. You've seen the stones travel, carried by water. Guided by hands, nudged by wind. You head toward the places where they were first cut from the earth itself. The quarries echoing with the music of hammer and chisel, ready to learn how the Egyptians broke mountains into building blocks. The desert hushes as you leave the Nile behind and step into the yawning darkness of the quarries. The moonlight doesn't reach far into these pits, only enough to glimmer faintly on pale limestone walls. Rough and scarred like the skin of an old giant. Your sandals scrape against chips of stone, the ground uneven from centuries of chiseling. This is where the journey of each block began, long before it floated on the river or was hauled up a ramp. The quarries were the womb of the pyramids, and tonight you walk among the echoes of their birth cries. The first sound that comes to you is a dull thunk, 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 the imagined rhythm of men hammering dolerite, pounding stones into limestone. Wall's dolerite, a hard volcanic rock, was the unsung hero here, used to pound, loosen, and break apart softer limestone. Picture workers swinging melon-sized balls of rock again and again until cracks spidered through the quarry face. It was back-breaking, monotonous, and just about as fun as trying to peel a pineapple with your teeth. And yet, out of this endless repetition came the building blocks of immortality. You crouch to examine a groove carved into the limestone floor. It's narrow but deep, like someone scratched the earth with a giant's fingernail. Workers used copper chisels here, their blades hammered thin, then sharpened again and again as they wore down. Copper isn't very hard, certainly not steel, but in skilled hands. And with persistence, it cut enough to shape the blocks. Archaeologists have found hundreds of discarded chisels at quarry sites, the ancient equivalent of dull pencils tossed aside during exams. Historians still argue whether copper alone was enough for the toughest granite blocks, or if abrasives like quartz sand were secretly the real cutting edge. Granite, by the way, was a whole other nightmare. The granite for Khufu's inner chambers came from quarries at Aswan. You imagine the sight, enormous blocks half-cut, abandoned mid-process, still lodged in bedrock because something cracked or shifted wrong. One famous block, known as the Unfinished Obelisk, lies there even today, weighing over 1,000 tons. It's so big that even modern cranes would sweat at the thought of moving it. The fact the Egyptians even tried shows the kind of ambition or stubbornness that defined this entire era. You can't help but picture the foreman who had to explain to Pharaoh, "Sorry, boss, this one's too heavy." That probably wasn't a great day at the office. The quarry floor feels alive with ghosts of workers. You picture hundreds of men, swinging tools, their bare backs slick with sweat, the air filled with dust that sticks in your throat. Some hum chants to keep rhythm, others grunt with each blow. Overseers wander the rows, checking angles, measuring with cords, barking orders. Somewhere nearby, women bring baskets of bread, while jars of beer slosh as evening rations. Even in exhaustion, there would have been moments of laughter, jokes shared, complaints whispered, dreams of home muttered under the stars. The quarries weren't just workplaces. They were microcosms of life, with all its grit and resilience. As you explore deeper, you notice ramps cut into the quarry sides. These acted like ancient highways, sloping paths that allowed blocks to be dragged upward. After being freed from the bedrock, imagine ropes biting into palms, wood sledges creaking under pressure, and workers pouring water on the sand to keep sleds from sinking. It's a detail proven by ancient wall paintings. Water, simple yet brilliant, reducing friction by stiffening. The sand, you can almost hear the slosh of jars and the sighs of relief as sledges moved just a little easier. The moon shifts and shadows crawl across the quarry walls. They reveal tool marks, still visible after thousands of years. You reach out and trace them with your fingers, the scratches of a worker long forgotten. A person who never imagined their handiwork would be studied millennia later. Each groove is both ordinary and miraculous, evidence that real human hands chipped away the foundations of the pyramids. It's a sobering reminder. History isn't built by gods or aliens. It's built by people who swing hammers until their arms ache. Here's a quirky little fact. Archaeologists once found traces of crocodile dung mixed with clay at quarry sites. No, it wasn't a practical joke. Some believe it was used as a kind of ancient sunscreen. Under the brutal Egyptian sun, workers smeared whatever they could find onto their skin. Forget SPF 50, try SPF. Hope the crocodile ate enough fish. Imagine explaining that to your dermatologist. Still, even with protection, quarry life was punishing. Cuts, blisters, sunstroke hit was dangerous work. Yet evidence suggests workers received medical care. At the village of Deir el-Medina, though later than pyramid times, records show doctors treating everything from broken bones to infected wounds. If workers for the pyramids enjoyed similar care, it suggests these weren't disposable slaves, but valued laborers, part of a colossal state project. Historians still argue about just how voluntary their labor was. Were they conscripted peasants paying taxes in muscle, or professionals who took pride in royal service? The truth may lie somewhere in between. You pause, closing your eyes. The quarry hums around you in memory. Chisels, hammers, laughter, groans, the hiss of sand under sledges. Above, the stars gleam coldly, indifferent witnesses. You think of the sheer volume of stone-removed quarry faces receding further and further back, gouging scars in the desert that still remain today. To the builders, these scars weren't disfigurements, they were sacrifices, offerings cut from the earth to honor a god-king. You open your eyes again, stepping carefully among the rubble. In the distance, the plateau looms, waiting. The blocks, once freed from the earth, will not rest here for long. Soon they'll be dragged across sand, floated along canals, and hauled up ramps. The quarry is only the beginning. As you leave, it's hollow silence. You feel as though you've just shaken hands with the underworld, the deep, dark source of stone that became light and monument on the horizon. The desert is quiet again as you step out of the quarries, but in your mind you can still hear the echoes of pounding dolerite and clinking copper. Ahead of you, carved into the sands, lie the ghostly outlines of ramps, those mysterious paths of stone and earth that once carried blocks skyward. The pyramids look impossibly steep when you tilt your head back. How on earth do you drag 2-ton blocks up something that feels like the world's biggest stairmaster? The ramps are the most likely answer, or at least one of them. Historians still argue whether they were straight, zigzagging, spiraled, or maybe all of the above at different times. Tonight, you get to walk them. The first ramp you step onto is a massive straight causeway, broad as a highway, stretching from the quarry edge toward the pyramid's base. The surface crunches beneath your sandals, gravel packed tight traces of wood planks and rope grooves still etched faintly in the ground. You imagine hundreds of men hauling sledges in unison, ropes creaking, feet stomping in rhythm, while overseers call out timing chants. The sound is deafening grunts, shouts, the hiss of sand being wetted to ease the load. Someone inevitably stumbles, curses, and gets yelled at by the foreman. Worksite drama isn't a modern invention. Straight ramps make sense when you picture the early stages of construction. They're simple. Build a ramp up the pyramid's face, drag stones up, extend it as the pyramid grows taller. But here's the snag: the longer and taller the pyramid, the longer the ramp had to be. Some estimates suggest a straight ramp for the Great Pyramid would have stretched nearly a mile long, requiring more material than the pyramid itself. Even the most determined pharaoh would probably raise an eyebrow at that inefficiency. So, you try a different path. This time, you find yourself circling the pyramid on a spiraling ramp that winds around its body like a sandstone snake. The climb is narrower, tighter, and more precarious. You brush against limestone blocks as you walk, their edges scraping your skin. Workers here would have been packed shoulder to shoulder, struggling around corners with sledges. The advantage? You don't need a mile-long runway, just a loop that hugs the pyramid's surface. The disadvantage? Visibility. You can't see the angles clearly, which means a poorly placed block could ruin your geometry. Historians still argue whether spirals could maintain the pyramid's near-perfect alignment. Then there are the zigzag ramps. You climb one now, switchbacking up the face, turning sharply at each level like a hiking trail through mountains. The back and forth makes the climb feel endless, but at least you're not running out of desert to build extra long ramps. Here, workers could maneuver stones with more control, but the whole system would look like scaffolding wrapped around the pyramid. Picture a construction site tangled with wooden frames, ropes dangling, sand piled, men shouting orders. Not so. Different from the chaos of a modern skyscraper, build menace, the hard hats and safety nets. And then there's the wild card, the internal ramp theory. Some modern architects suggest that the Egyptians may have built corridors inside the pyramid as they rose, dragging stones through hidden spiral tunnels. It sounds elegant, like a secret labyrinth of ramps inside the monument itself. Walking along the dark inner passage in your mind, you can almost imagine torches flickering, men straining in cramped tunnels, the air thick with dust. The catch: no definitive evidence of such internal ramps has ever been found, only tantalizing hints in scans and voids. Historians still argue whether this idea is genius insight or just wishful thinking. Whichever method they used, ramps were not just dirt piles. They were feats of engineering in their own right. Workers had to build and maintain them constantly, layering gravel, clay, and mud brick to create stable paths. Logs might have been laid under sledges to reduce drag, and water poured over surfaces to stiffen the sand. Imagine the logistics: ramps growing alongside the pyramid, constantly being rebuilt, shifted, and dismantled as construction advanced. The ramps themselves must have devoured almost as much labor as the pyramid. The climb grows steeper now. You lean forward, hands on your knees, panting as though you're really hauling a block. The stars glitter overhead, indifferent to your exhaustion. To keep spirits high, workers likely sang chants or clapped rhythms, something to sync their movements. Archaeologists have found scenes in tombs showing men hauling colossal statues while a conductor keeps time with claps. You imagine the same here. Voices echoing against stone, music forged from necessity. And of course, someone probably cracked a joke about who had the easier job, the haulers, or the guy whose only task was to clap. Halfway up, you pause and glance out over the plateau. The view is stunning. Below you, torchlight dots the workers' village like a constellation on the ground. Beyond, the Nile glimmers, reflecting the moon. Barges drift lazily, their cargoes waiting to be dragged up ramps just like the one you're on. It's a breathtaking panorama: stone, river, desert, stars all stitched together by human ambition. You realize the ramps were more than practical solutions. They were symbolic ascents, a physical manifestation of reaching toward the heavens. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some researchers suggest the Egyptians might have lubricated sledges not only with water, but with milk or even animal fat. Picture a foreman yelling, "Quick, bring the cow." That would make the ramp smell like a giant breakfast gone wrong. Whether true or not, it shows how inventive people can be when faced with moving several tons of stubborn rock. At last, you reach the top of your imaginary ramp. The stone you've been dragging in your mind settles into place with a dull thunk. Around you, Workers wipe sweat from their brows, their chests rising and falling with exhaustion. The ramp stretches below like a vein, pulsing with life and labor. You stand on the pyramid's growing shoulder, realizing how each block, each ramp, each grunt of effort was a step not just upward, but toward eternity. The ramps vanish into darkness, but the pyramid continues to rise, block by block, until it pierces the sky itself. The night air cools as you step away from the ramps, following the faint glow of fires clustered at the edge of the plateau. There, just beyond the shadows of the pyramids, lies the workers' village, the beating heart of this colossal endeavor. You walk into its dusty lanes, and suddenly the silence of stone gives way to the bustle of human life. Voices rise, laughter mingles with the crackle of ovens, and the comforting smell of bread and beer drifts toward you. The pyramids might be made of stone, but here you feel the flesh and blood of the people who made them possible. The settlement stretches out in rows of mud brick barracks, each one crammed with men who spend their days dragging blocks under the desert sun. You duck inside one hut and find straw mats scattered across the floor, pottery jars stacked neatly, and a small hearth where embers glow faintly. Personal touches catch your eye. Scratched symbols on the walls, a tiny amulet left. On a shelf, even a half-played game scratched into the dirt. It feels oddly familiar, like walking into a college dorm after finals week, crowded, messy and buzzing with exhaustion and camaraderie. Outside, you wander toward the kitchens. The heat from enormous bread ovens washes over you. Bakers shovel loaves into clay domes, pulling them out steaming, their crusts crackling in the night air. Nearby, brewers stir vats of bubbling beer, the yeasty smell heavy and earthy. Each worker received rations of bread, beer, and onions enough to keep the energy flowing during brutal shifts. Archaeologists estimate tens of thousands of loaves, and gallons were consumed daily. Forget protein shakes, this was the ancient Egyptian power diet. And yes, workers sometimes complained about onion shortages, proving that even in antiquity, people got cranky when their snacks ran out. You step further and hear a clatter of dice-like objects. A small group of men hunches in a circle, tossing knucklebones, laughing and arguing over the outcome. Gambling, it seems, was as timeless as building pyramids. One man raises his beer jar in triumph, while another groans dramatically. After hours of hauling blocks, they unwind with games, jokes, and perhaps some good-natured grumbling about their supervisors. You can almost hear one mutter, "If I have to drag one more stone tomorrow, I'm quitting and becoming a potter." Nearby, the air smells sharper herbs, resin, and something medicinal. You peek into a small structure where a healer tends to an injured worker. He's wrapping a bandage around a bruised ankle, while another patient sips a bitter concoction from a clay cup. Archaeological finds suggest workers received organized medical care splints, bandages, even rudimentary surgery. It wasn't perfect, but it shows they weren't treated like disposable slaves. Instead, the workforce was maintained, supported, and in some ways, respected. Historians still argue whether this reflected genuine welfare or simply all a healthy worker is a productive one. As you wander further, you notice graffiti etched onto walls, names, crude sketches, even team slogans. Excavations have revealed that workers organized into crews with colorful nicknames, like Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkaure. It's the ancient equivalent of wearing matching t-shirts for a company retreat, except your project is a giant tomb visible from space. Imagine the bragging rights. "Yeah, I was on the pyramid crew." No big deal. You smile, realizing that pride, humor, and team spirit carry just as much weight as ropes and SLEDs. The village buzzes even at night. Children chase each other between huts, their giggles rising above the hum of conversation. Women carry water jars, balancing them gracefully as they walk. The clang of copper tools being repaired rings from a workshop, sparks flickering in the dark. You sense the rhythm of a community, not just a work camp. This was no temporary tent city. It was a permanent settlement designed to sustain an immense, decades-long project. Archaeologists have uncovered bakeries, breweries, granaries, and even cemeteries nearby, where workers were buried with care. These graves, complete with offerings, suggest honor rather than neglect. You stop near a fire where a group of workers sits in a circle. One strums a stringed instrument, plucking a slow, hypnotic tune. Another taps rhythm on a jar, creating a beat that blends with the distant whisper of desert wind. Music floats through the village, a balm for weary bodies. Someone cracks a joke too quiet for you to hear, but the group bursts out laughing, shoulders shaking, heads tipped back. You realize that for all the grandeur of the pyramids, what kept this workforce moving was not just order and discipline, it was humor, companionship, and a shared sense of purpose. And maybe the promise of one more beer at the end of the day. Quirky tidbit emerges as you recall records from ancient accounts. Rations included not just onions, but garlic too. Some workers supposedly believed garlic boosted strength and protected against illness. In one story, Pharaoh once paid vast sums to secure more garlic for his workers. Imagine the headlines: Royal Treasury emptied over garlic shortage. Historians still debate whether this tale is exaggerated. But given humanity's eternal obsession with food, it's not entirely out of the question. The night deepens. You glance up, and the pyramids loom in the distance, their outlines softened by starlight. It's easy to forget their cold immensity when you stand here among the warmth of fires, the chatter of voices, the smell of fresh bread. The stones might form the monument, but it's the workers' lives, their sweat, their laughter, and even their petty squabbles that truly animate the project. The village is the heart that pumps energy into the pyramid, night after night, day after day. As you leave, the sound of clinking cups and distant laughter lingers in your ears. The image of weary men sprawled on mats, bellies full of bread, and minds drifting into dreams sticks with you. Tomorrow, they'll rise before dawn, pick up ropes, and climb ramps once more. But tonight, they rest, wrapped in the same starlight that glitters above you. And as you walk back toward the looming silhouette of the pyramid, you can't help but think maybe the greatest miracle wasn't the stone monument itself, but the bustling, resilient community that made it rise from the desert. The fires of the workers' village fade behind you, and now you find yourself drawn toward a different kind of activity, quieter, but no less important. Near the base of the pyramid, in the glow of torchlight, men kneel over lines scratched into the sand. Their hands move with precision, adjusting ropes, plumb bobs, and measuring rods. These are the engineers and surveyors, the minds behind the muscle. Without them, the pyramid would be nothing more than a lopsided pile of rock. With them, it becomes geometry incarnate, as if the desert itself had been persuaded to obey. Mathematics. You crouch beside one engineer as he pulls a taut cord across the ground. He sprinkles chalk dust along its length, then snaps it, leaving a perfect straight line, simple yet effective. Another man sights the stars through a forked wooden tool called a Merkaba, kind of ancient alignment instrument. He waits until a star crosses the plumb line, then calls out, marking true north. You watch in awe as they transfer the heavens onto Earth, aligning the pyramid sides with a precision that makes your modern attempts at hanging a picture frame look pitiful. Historians still argue whether they used the circumpolar stars, the sun's shadow at equinox, or some other method entirely. But the fact remains, the Great Pyramid's orientation is staggeringly accurate, off by less than 1/4 of a degree. Not bad for guys without lasers. You walk along the pyramid's base, tracing your fingers over its foundation stones. Each block is so tightly fitted that you can't slip a piece of paper between them. Imagine the planning required. Thousands of blocks, each cut to fit with uncanny precision. The engineers used leveling tools like the A-frame, plumb basically a wooden triangle with a hanging weight to make sure every stone sat perfectly horizontal. They even dug trenches, filled them with water, and used the surface as a natural level, a bubble level 4,000 years early. You can't help but grin ancient Egypt, making Home Depot obsolete since 2600 BCE. As you climb slightly higher, the work feels more precarious. Engineers direct workers on where to place each block, calling out like orchestra conductors. Chalk lines stretch across the growing tiers, ropes dangling to mark vertical planes. With each stone, the pyramid's edges rise crisp and straight. You look at the slope and realize how consistent it is. The Great Pyramid's angle is about 51.5 degrees, and every single side holds that slope almost flawlessly. Historians still argue whether the angle was achieved through trial and error building. Small models first, or, if the Egyptians had formulae we've long forgotten. Either way, the consistency is mind-boggling. Here's a quirky little tidbit. Ancient graffiti found inside the pyramid suggests that crews sometimes left playful marks for each other. One block was labeled with instructions like "this side up," essentially the world's oldest sticky note. Another bore a team nickname, the Friends of Khufu. You can almost hear the chuckles as workers added their inside jokes to history's most serious monument. It's comforting to know that even amid cosmic alignments, someone was basically writing LOL on the pharaoh's tomb. You pause at a corner where two sides of the pyramid meet. The joint is razor sharp, even after thousands of years of erosion. How did they achieve this perfection without modern tools? Some scholars suggest they used sighting rods and long measuring cords, adjusting each row of blocks with obsessive care. Others think it came down to sheer stubborn trial and error check. Adjust, check again multiplied over decades. Either way, the result is stunning. Straight lines so clean they almost hum in the moonlight. You brush your hand along the corner and feel the coolness of stone against your fingertips, as if geometry itself has a pulse. The air smells faintly of oil lamps as you step inside one of the narrow service corridors at the pyramid's base. It's dark and echoing, every footstep swallowed in silence. The walls here are smooth, polished by generations of hands and ropes, dragging blocks. Engineers likely worked in these passages too, measuring, checking alignments, leaving hidden chalk marks long since erased. It's humbling to realize that much of their genius remains invisible. The pyramid may look like brute force, but inside, it's a symphony of mathematics, quietly directing every stone. Outside again, the stars blaze overhead, their brilliance sharpening the connection between sky and structure. Some scholars suggest that the pyramid's layout mirrors Orion's belt, the three stars mapped into stone. Others argue this is coincidence, that humans love seeing patterns where none exist. Historians still argue whether the pyramids were designed as star maps, or simply as giant tombs. Standing here with the constellations sparkling right above the triangular peaks, you feel the debate doesn't matter. The effect is undeniable. The engineers anchored heaven into earth. You wander back toward the surveyors, who are still adjusting. Ropes and cords in the sand. One man pours water into a trench, watching the liquid settle evenly, then marks the line along the edge. Another stretches a cord tight, calling out for assistance to hold it steady. Their movements are calm, meticulous, almost meditative. The laborers might sweat and strain, but the engineers breathe rhythm and order into the chaos. Without them, the pyramid would crumble into chaos itself. With them, it rises as a flawless machine of stone. And here's one last cheeky thought. While you're watching these geniuses track stars and snap chalk lines, remember that you once mismeasured your kitchen shelf by half an inch. If the ancient surveyors could hear you complain about IKEA furniture, they'd probably just roll their eyes and go back to aligning the cosmos. The fires of the village burned faint in the distance. But here, Beside the silent monument under the stars, you feel something different and almost mathematical hush. As though the desert itself respects the lines drawn into its skin. The engineers' whispers, their chalk, their ropes, have tamed chaos into order. And as the pyramid grows, so too does the illusion that eternity itself can be measured one perfect angle at a time. The pyramid is rising now, and you can feel the pressure of each passing season in the rhythm of the work. You walk among teams that no longer just haul blocks across flat ground, they wrestle with height. The structure is too tall, too simply. Drag stones from the desert floor up to their place. So the Egyptians, in their endless resourcefulness, conjured a new solution: ramps by torchlight. You see men spreading mud brick, rubble, and limestone chips into long, sloping causeways. Their torches flicker against the surface, making the ramp look like a giant tongue stretching toward the heavens. Workers stomp down the layers, sprinkling water to harden the surface. Oxen haul baskets of rubble to reinforce the sides, while foremen shout to keep the slope firm and steady. The air smells of dust and sweat, mingled with a sharp tang of newly cut limestone. Historians still argue about the ramp system. Was it a single massive straight ramp stretching out hundreds of meters into the desert, or a clever spiral hugging the pyramid's sides like a coiled serpent? Some even propose zigzagging switchbacks. Each idea has its merits, but none are confirmed, leaving us squinting at the ruins like detectives at a crime scene with missing clues. What is certain is that ramps existed without them, raising blocks weighing several tons to dizzying heights. Would have been impossible. As you climb one of these ramps in the moonlight, your legs burn with the incline. The stones beneath your feet shift slightly, and you imagine the thousands of sandals that have worn grooves into the surface. Ahead, a team strains as they haul another block upward, ropes digging into their shoulders. A foreman splashes water on the ramp, reducing friction just enough to keep the block sliding. You can almost hear the creak of rope fibers straining like violin strings on the edge of snapping. And yet, amid this grunt work, there is ingenuity. Small sledges are greased with animal fat, a trick that reduces drag significantly. Some experiments in modern times show that just the right amount of water on sand can cut resistance nearly in half. It's simple physics, but here it feels like sorcery. You smirk leave it to the Egyptians to reinvent WD 44,000 years early. Halfway up the ramp, you pause to catch your breath. Below, the floodplains stretch into darkness, glistening with moonlight on irrigated channels. Above, the unfinished pyramid looms, its core rough and stepped like a colossal staircase. Torches dot the structure like stars, each one marking a team at work even through the night. It's a sight that makes your stomach flip, humanity clawing skyward one block at a time like ants building a mountain. You overhear workers trading complaints and jokes as they labor. "My wife will think I'm marrying the pyramid." One groans, drawing laughter. Another hums a tune, rhythm matching his steps. It's a reminder that even on these grueling ramps, life insisted on humor. Archaeologists have found fragments of songs that may have accompanied this work, designed to keep the hauling teams in step. You try to imagine it? Dozens of men chanting in unison, voices echoing across the desert night, each syllable pulling stone and spirit upward. Together, near the pyramid's face, ramps grow steeper. Workers place logs beneath sledges for extra leverage, while others wedge pry bars into gaps, shouting as they heave. Supervisors stand at intervals, guiding traffic like ancient air traffic controllers. There's order here, but also chaos. 1,000 moving parts woven together by stubborn determination. Historians still argue whether these ramps were dismantled as the pyramid rose, leaving almost no trace, or if smaller spiral ramps clung to the upper levels until the very end. One fringe idea even suggests cranes made of counterweights, swinging blocks upward like a playground seesaw. Though evidence is thin, you can't help but imagine the ingenuity such a system would require. The truth may be lost, hidden beneath centuries of sand, but the effect is undeniable. The ramps were arteries, pumping stone and sweat into the body of the pyramid. You edge closer to the top of one ramp, where a team has just maneuvered a block into place. A worker kneels to adjust wooden shims beneath the stone, tapping them gently with a mallet until the surface levels out. Another brushes sand into the gaps, sealing the stone like mortar. They step back, satisfied. One more piece locked in too. Eternity. Looking down the ramp, you marvel at how much labor has gone into simply moving upward. Thousands of blocks already sit stacked beneath your feet, each one a victory over gravity. The slope stretches back into the desert like a scar, whispering of all the effort poured into this climb. The workers may not see it yet, but you know what they're creating? A stairway not just for their king, but for all of human memory. A stray donkey brays at the bottom of the ramp, annoyed by the noise. The sound makes you chuckle, as if the animal is complaining that humans have finally gone too far. You're building a mountain, the donkey seems to say. Why not just use the ones nature already made? But of course, humans aren't satisfied with what's already there. We carve our own mountains, align them with the stars, and dare time itself to knock them down, as you step aside to let another team pass with their burden. The night air cools on your skin. The ramp creaks beneath the weight, dust rising in thin clouds. You breathe it in, the taste of history itself. And somewhere inside you, a flicker of awe takes hold. The ramps may not survive the ages, but their invisible lines shaped everything you see before you. Without them, the pyramid would remain a dream trapped in the sand. With them, it rises, step by dusty step, toward immortality. The higher you climb, the more dangerous everything becomes. The ramps groan beneath the weight of every passing sledge, and the margin for error shrinks with each layer of stone. One slip, one rope snapping, and a block weighing several tons could tumble, crushing anything in its path. And yet, the workers keep going because, at this stage, something extraordinary is happening. The rough staircase you've seen for weeks is slowly transforming into the smooth-sided giant that history will remember. You step onto a ledge where workers are chiseling the fine white limestone casing blocks. Unlike the duller core stones, these gleam even in moonlight, reflecting back a pale glow that makes the pyramid shimmer. You reach out, running your hand across the cool, smooth face of a finished block. And it's so perfectly polished, it feels almost like glass. No wonder ancient visitors later described the pyramids as shining mountains, bright enough to be seen from miles across the desert. But how do they place these finishing stones so high, so precisely? That's the mystery you're here to witness. Teams of skilled masons are guiding each casing block carefully, tapping wedges into place, ensuring the angles meet exactly. Historians still argue whether scaffolding and mini-ramps wrapped the pyramid's surface during this phase, allowing masons to climb and fit blocks one by one. Others suggest they trimmed and polished stones after the pyramid was complete, working downward like careful barbers shaving a giant stubble. The evidence is patchy, and like so much of this story, certainty slips through your fingers like sand. What you can see is the craftsmanship. Each joint is so tight that even now, thousands of years later, you couldn't fit a razor blade between the stones. Imagine doing that without steel tools or modern surveying equipment. It's the kind of precision that makes you want to squint suspiciously at the night sky and wonder if aliens lent a hand. You chuckle softly to yourself, sure, it's fun to joke, but the more you watch, the more you realize human patience and ingenuity are miracles enough. A master mason walks past, carrying a copper chisel worn down from use. His apprentices follow with baskets of tools, chanting under their breath to keep rhythm as they work. You notice the mason doesn't bark orders, he whispers them. This is delicate work, requiring steady hands and sharper focus than the brute hauling you saw earlier. Here, a misaligned block isn't just a mistake. It could ruin the entire slope of a face meant to point toward eternity. As dawn begins to creep over the horizon, the pyramid's surface takes on a soft, golden glow. The fresh limestone reflects the light so fiercely you squint, imagining what this would have looked like when the whole monument was finished, an enormous beacon, dazzling in the sun. Later, Greek writers described the pyramids as blazing white. And you can see now why they thought of them almost as divine mirrors, catching the rays of Ra himself. And yet, whispers of doubt ripple among the workers. You overhear one say, "How? Will this shine last when storms and sand eat at it?" His neighbor shrugs. "It is not for us to worry. It is for the king to walk in the sky." There's something both humbling and eerie about the tan acceptance that their sweat and skill will vanish beneath the desert winds, but the king's memory will endure. You edge around a group, carefully lowering a casing block into place. They slide it down a small chute, guiding it with wooden levers, then wedge it tight against its neighbor. The sound it makes when it locks into place is oddly satisfying, a solid thunk that echoes in your chest. Like a puzzle piece, one more fraction of the dream clicks together. Historians still argue whether all the pyramids were finished with this smooth casing. Some later ones stand today with stepped cores exposed, their gleaming skin long stripped away by quarrying or weather. Yet, in your moment, standing here on the scaffold of Khufu's Great Pyramid, you see it in its intended glory. Not a rough heap of stone, but a perfect geometric vision. And there's a fringe tidbit here. Some scholars speculate the polished limestone sides might have had a deeper function than beauty. With their reflective surfaces, the pyramids could have acted like enormous solar symbols, channeling the sun's power into the sacred complex. Some even imagine the shining sides used to blind invaders or signal across distances like cosmic lighthouses. Whether mystical or practical, you can't deny the effect. This thing shines as if it wants to speak to the heavens, as workers polish the finished stones with sandstone rubbers. You can almost hear the hiss of grit against rock. It's strangely hypnotic, like a lullaby of stone. You think of modern construction crews blasting music from radios while they work here. It's the rhythm of tools, the occasional grunt, the steady scrape that becomes its own background. One worker pauses, wipes his brow, and grins at you. "Careful, stranger," he says with a wink. "If you stare too long, Ra will think you're trying to outshine him." You laugh, shaking your head. Leave it to humans even dangling. Off the side of a giant limestone slope, two still crack jokes about sun gods dot by midday. The surface gleams like ice under the desert sun. It's so bright you have to shield your eyes. From below, the people of Memphis must be gasping at this spectacle, a mountain that seems alive, growing smoother, sharper, more luminous with every stone. It's not just a tomb anymore. It's a statement. A monument so bold it dares the desert itself to challenge its permanence. And as the workers climb down, leaving the top layer for another day, you remain there for a moment, hand pressed against the cool, gleaming face. It's humbling to know that, in your time, almost all of this polish will be gone, stripped for later building projects or weathered away. But right now, in this fleeting instant, you're seeing the pyramid as it was meant to be, a man-made star fallen to earth. The pyramid now gleams, but the work is far from finished. You wander past the bustling ramps and scaffolds toward the flat expanse stretching to the east. Here, another frenzy of activity unfolds, almost as busy as the construction of the pyramid itself. Stonemasons, carpenters, potters, and laborers are laying out the foundations of temples, causeways, and courtyards that will one day wrap the pyramid in a grand ceremonial complex. It feels a little like a movie set expanding in every direction, one giant central star with countless supporting stages. The pyramid might be the headline act, but what surrounds it is just as important. Without the temples and decorated causeways, this monument would be little more than a shiny pile of stone. Instead, it becomes the beating heart of a spiritual machine, designed to keep a king's soul powered for eternity. You step onto the beginnings of the mortuary temple, pressed right up against the pyramid's eastern face. Here, priests will one day perform offerings: bread, beer, oxen, incense, anything the pharaoh's spirit might crave in the afterlife. Already, you can see carefully carved limestone blocks being lowered into position, decorated with unfinished reliefs of servants and gods. The walls smell faintly of fresh plaster, a reminder that this is not just about engineering, but also artistry. Historians still argue whether every temple was completed alongside the pyramid or sometimes rushed after the king's death. Either way, the pressure here feels just as high as on the ramps. Beyond the temple stretches the beginning of a massive stone causeway. You squint down its length, seeing it snake like a straight ribbon toward the valley temple near the Nile. Later, this enclosed causeway will be roofed, its walls decorated with colorful murals depicting royal victories, feasts, and offerings. Right now, it's more like a giant hallway under construction, lined with scaffolding and littered with workers carrying basket after basket of rubble to fill the base. One old worker grins at you as he balances his basket. "We're building a road for gods to walk," he says. You glance up at the desert sun and mutter that maybe they should also install a few shade umbrellas. He laughs, wheezes, then keeps shuffling forward. No time to waste. What fascinates you most is how organized it all is. The pyramid site has transformed into a miniature city. Storage yards for stone, kilns for pottery, bakeries belching smoke from endless bread loaves, breweries churning with the yeasty temps of beer, even pens for livestock destined for ritual sacrifice. You realize you could live here indefinitely and never run out of food or work. It's like an ancient company town, complete with housing for overseers, quarters for priests in training, and dormitories for common workers. A quirky tidbit catches your ear. Some of the priests believe the pyramid complex aligns not only with the sun, but also with the stars. You hear whispers about the causeway pointing toward the constellation Orion, which they say represents Osiris, lord of the underworld. The king will follow that path, one murmurs, pointing skyward, and rise among the stars. It's strangely poetic, and you can't help but wonder if the geometry of this place really is one giant cosmic map. Historians still argue about that too. Of course, whether these alignments were intentional master plans or happy coincidences noticed only later at the Valley Temple by the river. Things feel different, more polished, more ceremonial. This is where the pharaoh's body will first arrive after embalming. Ferried across the Nile, greeted by priests with incense and chants. You watch as huge granite blocks are hauled into place, darker and more imposing than the pale limestone. The contrast is striking, like stepping from sunlight into shadow, even unfinished. You sense the solemnity of this space. It's a threshold between worlds. And speaking of thresholds, you pass a corner where artisans are carving offering statues. Dozens of stone figures sit waiting, some with unfinished faces. Others already so lifelike you expect them to blink. These statues are insurance policies for the pharaoh. If one is damaged, another will serve as a vessel for his spirit. You smirk, realizing the ancient Egyptians basically invented backups long before computers. Redundancy equals immortality as you drift back toward the main pyramid. You notice how the complex is taking shape as a carefully orchestrated stage for rituals. Processions will one day march from the Nile up the causeway, carrying food, drink, and treasures. Priests will chant hymns in echoing courtyards, their voices bouncing against the stone, rising like smoke toward the sky. Every wall, every statue, every carving is another cog in the great machine of eternity. And you, lucky enough to sneak a peek, are beginning to see the full picture. The air grows cooler as evening sets in, and you pause by a row of unfinished pillars. They're huge, but carved not with precise corners either. They bulge outward, slightly correcting for the way human eyes trick themselves when viewing vertical lines. Even here, ancient builders anticipated optical illusions, designing structures that would look right to the human gaze. That little discovery makes you grin. Forget aliens, these architects were also psychologists, from your vantage point. The complex is a frenzy of overlapping labors. Drums beat to keep haulers in rhythm. Copper chisels ring against stone. Priests mutter incantations over freshly carved altars. Somewhere, children dart between baskets of sand, laughing despite the dust. And above it all looms the pyramid itself, now gleaming with its polished casing, serving as the central magnet pulling all of this chaos into harmony. By nightfall, fires flicker across the worksite. Workers eat bread dipped in beer, swapping jokes and stories about which gods they think would win in a wrestling match. One insists Horus would easily take down Seth. Another argues Isis would outwit them all. You shake your head, smiling eternity. Might be serious business, but humans will always find time for debates that sound suspiciously like ancient pub talk. The pyramid's shadow stretches long across the sand, touching the half-finished walls of the temple. You stand there for a while, listening to the hum of activity slowly quiet into murmurs, then into silence. And in that silence, you finally see it. The pyramid is no longer a lone structure. It is part of an ecosystem, a sacred machine, a theatrical stage where stone, ritual, and belief all converge. Without this network, the pharaoh's tomb would be just a tomb. With it, it becomes a gateway to eternity. You drift further into the shadows of the site, away from the clanging hammers and the chanting priests. And you stumble upon something even more impressive than the blocks and temples, the living, breathing city that sustains it all. Forget the pyramid itself for a moment. This is where the true miracle lies. You are standing in the workers' village, a sprawling support system that keeps thousands of laborers fed, clothed, and healthy enough to haul stone until their backs. Picture rows of mud brick houses, small but sturdy, clustered in tight alleys. Smoke curls from ovens where loaves of bread bake in bulk, filling the air with a yeasty tang. A brewery bubbles with the sour-sweet scent of barley beer. You've read the old stories about slaves dragging stones under the lash, but here you can see that's not the whole picture. These people aren't shackled. They're eating hearty meals, laughing over mugs of beer, and even getting decent medical care. Archaeologists have found skeletal remains with healed fractures and signs of surgery, meaning these workers weren't disposable, they were valued. Imagine a foreman with his clipboard. Well, papyrus board checking attendance while the company doctor adjusts someone's broken leg with splints. It's more organized than your local urgent care. The houses are modest, each with low ceilings and narrow rooms. Inside, mats cover the floor, and jars of grain line the walls. Families chatter as children chase each other through the alleys, raising dust and occasional parental scolding. One woman offers you a chunk of bread and a smear of garlic paste. It's pungent, but after hours breathing limestone dust, you don't complain. You thank her, though she just shakes her head and mutters something about foreigners always gawking. You walk on and realize this isn't just a village, it's an entire ecosystem. There are bakeries designed like industrial kitchens with dozens of conical bread molds lined up in rows. The bread comes out dense and chewy, almost brick-like, but perfect for feeding masses of hungry workers. Next door, massive vats of beer ferment, frothing and hissing like some ancient science experiment. Each worker reportedly gets around 2 gallons of beer, a dehydration, calories, and buzz all rolled into one. You smirk and think, OSHA might have opinions about this workplace perk. Alongside the food, there's livestock. Pens of goats, cattle, and geese, all destined for the workers' stew pots or the priest's rituals. The smell is, let's say, memorable. If you could bottle it, the fragrance would probably be called Eau de Pyramid Worker. A quirky detail you overhear from a nearby scribe. Workers were organized into rotating crews with playful names, like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaure. It's basically ancient team branding. Imagine men hauling a 2-ton block, chanting in unison, proudly declaring themselves the strong right hand of Pharaoh. It's almost like football teams, complete with mascots, except the mascot is eternal life. Historians still argue whether all these workers were permanent staff or whether peasants rotated in during the Nile flood season, when their fields were underwater and farming was impossible. Maybe it was both, a core group of skilled builders supported by waves of temporary laborers. Either way, the system worked astonishingly well. And you begin to appreciate how this wasn't a random slog, but a highly coordinated national project. Near the edge of the village, you discover an even more surprising sight, a kind of proto-hospital. Bones uncovered in sites like these show amputations that healed, spines treated for injury, and teeth drilled for cavities. Someone here knew a thing or two about medicine. One skeleton revealed a worker with a crushed spine who lived for years after his accident. You try to imagine his fellow villagers caring for him, feeding him bread and beer, keeping him part of the community despite being unable to haul stones. Doesn't quite match the old picture of merciless slave camps, does it? And the records hint at other perks: toil for massages, sometimes fish or figs added to the diet, even clothing rations. This was tough, grueling work, no doubt, but it was also a job with structure, meals, camaraderie, and surprisingly humane treatment. You catch yourself thinking that aside from the sand and the sunburn, it doesn't sound too different from a modern worksite with fewer HR meetings. The more you look, the more it feels like the pyramid couldn't have been built without this city. The massive construction above the plateau was just the tip of the iceberg. Down here in the dust, in the kitchens, bakeries, and barracks, the true foundation of the project was laid. Every loaf of bread, every jar of beer, every carefully tended wound kept the great machine turning as twilight deepens. The workers gather for their evening meal. Fires crackle, pots bubble, and someone starts a song. The words are lost to time, but the rhythm is unmistakable. A work song, half chant, half prayer, echoing with pride and exhaustion. You watch as the children quiet down, the workers pass bowls around, and the village relaxes. For a brief moment, the pyramid looming in the distance doesn't feel like a cold monument of stone. It feels like the shared dream of a community. A monument with a human heartbeat. You realize something comforting. The real story of how the pyramids were built isn't just about ramps, levers, or alignment with Orion. It's about bread crusts, laughter, splinted bones, and beer mugs clinking under the desert stars. It's about people, ordinary, extraordinary people who made the impossible look inevitable. You wander away from the warm glow of the worker village fires and find yourself on a quieter path leading toward a cluster of structures that look more official. Here, you sense a different kind of rhythm, the hum of authority. This is where the overseers, scribes, and administrators keep everything running, the brains behind the muscle. Without them, all those loaves of bread and gallons of beer wouldn't line up with the backbreaking schedules of hauling stone. Step into one of the administrative buildings, and the first thing you notice isn't noise or dust, it's silence, broken only by the scratching of reed pens on papyrus. Scribes sit hunched over, tallying rations, calculating crew assignments, and tracking which teams hauled how many blocks in a day. You lean closer and glimpse symbols for bread, beer, cattle, scratched in neat little rows. It's basically an ancient spreadsheet, except without the soul-crushing Excel crashes. If you squint, you can almost hear one scribe sigh. My ink jar just froze again. Anyone know a fix? A foreman strides through, barking instructions, his linen kilt stiff with starch. He glances at the numbers, then at the runners who will relay orders to the crews outside. It's all astonishingly bureaucratic. This pyramid is as much a government office as it is a construction site. The Egyptians loved order. And here you can see it manifested in ink and clay tablets. Historians still argue whether these overseers were noble-born administrators or skilled workers promoted from the ranks. Some evidence suggests they were literate. Elites others that they rose through experience. Either way, their job was brutal in its own way, keeping thousands of laborers aligned like cogs in a machine. No easy feat when your workforce consumes more bread in a day than a modern bakery chain can bake in a week. You walk through another chamber, where small piles of tokens made from limestone flakes represent debts, payments, and deliveries. It looks like play money, but it was dead serious. Without these, the whole operation would crumble. Imagine a worker not getting his beer ration. There'd be a strike before sundown. Yes, ancient Egypt had strikes. Workers once walked off a job demanding more rations, leaving half-carved statues abandoned mid-process. So the overseers here had to keep everyone reasonably satisfied, or else outside. You spot a training ground of sorts where new recruits are being organized into work gangs. The air buzzes with activity, captains shouting, men forming lines, rhythmic chants to keep them moving in sync. Each group has its name, its pride, its mascot scratched into their quarters, but they aren't faceless drones. They're a team, a brotherhood. You chuckle, imagining them embroidering team flags like modern sports fans, and the hierarchy doesn't stop at the crews. Above them loom architects and engineers, men who draw plans with string, straight edges, and rudimentary levels. They decide the slope of the pyramid, the placement of each chamber, the angle of each corridor. They're the visionaries, though, if you ask the laborers. They're also the guys who made their lives unnecessarily difficult. Really? Another hidden chamber? Sure, why not? We'll just break our backs a little more. One quirky tidbit. Some graffiti left behind on stone blocks wasn't serious instructions, but jokes from these very crews. Little doodles of animals, sarcastic inscriptions, or snide comments about the boss. Workers have always found ways to poke fun at management. Picture one crew carving a tiny donkey and labeling it after their least favorite overseer. It's workplace humor older than your grandmother's jokes. As you peer at the meticulous planning, you realize the pyramid wasn't a random pile of stone, it was logistics incarnate. Every loaf of bread baked, every jar of beer brewed, every copper chisel distributed, every man rotated on shift, all of it tracked and balanced. Forget the aliens. The real miracle was project management, and yet, even with this precision, things went wrong, blocks cracked, ropes snapped, men got hurt. When that happened, the overseers had to reshuffle crews, allocate spare tools, and keep morale steady. Too much chaos, and Pharaoh's divine project could falter. The pressure must have been suffocating. Imagine your boss threatening eternal disgrace if you missed a deadline. Suddenly, your Monday morning emails don't sound so bad as night deepens. You climb onto a small rise overlooking the site. Below, the floodplains stretch out, dotted with campfires. Scribes hunch over their papyrus scrolls by torchlight, eyes squinting, shoulders stiff. Runners dart back and forth with messages. Foremen shout, their voices carried on the dry breeze. It feels strangely modern, the endless coordination, the constant paperwork, the push to meet deadlines. you sit back and realize something. The pyramid was not just an engineering marvel, but also a social one. An entire society had to align itself to make it happen. Farmers giving up grain for rations, bureaucrats counting loaves, priests chanting blessings, laborers breaking their backs. It wasn't just a monument for a king. It was proof of how much organization, belief, and sheer stubbornness humans could muster when told, "Hey, build me a mountain out of stone." You exhale, letting the silence settle. The fires below flicker like stars across the ground. The pyramid looms above, not as a solitary wonder, but as the tip of an invisible iceberg of human planning and management. In a way, the real monument isn't made of limestone knights, made of papyrus records, sweat, and the grumbles of overworked scribes who probably wished they'd just stayed farmers. You wake with a faint scent of incense in your nose, the kind that clings to your clothes long after you leave a temple. The pyramids may have been stone mountains, but in the eyes of the Egyptians, they were also holy vessels. Every cut block, every sloping face, every hidden passage was wrapped in layers of symbolism. You can't really separate the engineering from the religion if you tried. You'd be peeling the papyrus right off the scroll, so you drift closer to the base of the pyramid, where priests murmur in the torchlight. They sprinkle natron and wave palm fronds, blessing the workers and tools. Imagine showing up to your construction shift today and having someone sprinkle baking soda on your hammer while chanting prayers. It might feel odd. But here, it meant everything. To build for Pharaoh was to build for eternity. After all, Pharaoh wasn't just a man, he was Horus in the flesh. And when he died, he became Osiris, Lord of the Dead. No pressure, right? Just build a cosmic stairway for a literal god. The pyramid itself was more than a tomb. Look at its sides. They line up almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. North, south, east, west, all pinned down with uncanny precision, long before compasses existed. Historians still argue whether they used the stars, the sun's shadow, or some ingenious combination. Either way, the builders weren't just stacking rocks, they were aligning the king with the very heartbeat of the cosmos. You tilt your head back and trace the slope of the pyramid. The angle isn't random either. Some scholars think it reflects the rays of the sun, a way of capturing Ra's descent from the heavens. Others point to ancient religious texts describing a stairway of light for Pharaoh's soul. It's all layered with meaning, geometry, astronomy, and theology dancing together. If your math teacher had taught like this, you might have actually enjoyed geometry. Inside, the passages snake upward and downward, crossing like veins inside a colossal body. The king's chamber, cut from massive granite blocks, feels more like a sanctum than a room. Stand in it, and your voice echoes with a low, humming resonance. Some fringe enthusiasts insist these chambers were designed to channel sound or energy, as if the Egyptians invented a spiritual subwoofer. Mainstream historians roll their eyes at that, but even they admit the acoustics are striking. The walls of nearby temples hold texts from the Pyramid Age. They describe how Pharaoh ascends through the sky to join the sun god, leaping from star to star. One quirky tidbit: these texts actually include spells that mention Pharaoh transforming into animals, hawks, serpents, even a celestial goose. Yes, the mighty king could flap his way into eternity as a cosmic goose. Somewhere, you imagine a priest chanting solemnly, while trying not to laugh at the idea of their divine ruler honking his way through the afterlife. And then there's the Benbon stone, the sacred pyramid-shaped relic said to represent the first mound of creation that rose from the primordial waters. The pyramids echoed that shape on a massive scale. To Egyptians, they weren't just tombs. They were literally recreating the first moment of the universe, anchoring creation itself in stone. That's a heavy metaphor to haul around, along with the limestone, the pyramid's polished outer casing, when fresh, would have gleamed like a beacon. Imagine it in the sun, blindingly white, visible for miles across the desert. Some scholars think it symbolized the rays of Ra, shimmering like frozen sunlight. Others say it was meant to dazzle and remind everyone that Pharaoh's power reached from earth to sky. Either way, it wasn't subtle. Picture living in a mud brick hut, and glancing over at the glittering triangle reminding you daily who ran the place. You shuffle into a small side temple, where priests conduct daily offerings even while construction continues. Statues of gods glimmer in the candlelight, their painted eyes wide, almost alive. The smell of roasted meat and beer fills the air. It's part ritual, part lunch break. Workers sometimes received leftover offerings as rations, meaning divine food trickled down from the altar to the worksite. Forget trickle-down economics. This was trickle-down sacred barbecue. Historians still argue whether the pyramid was primarily a tomb, a resurrection machine, or a symbolic engine to ensure the sun rose each morning. The debates get fierce, especially when fringe theories enter the room. Aliens, energy beams, mystical power plants, you name it, someone's suggested it. The truth is probably both simpler and more profound. It was a monument that bound together politics, religion, and the cosmos in a way we can barely grasp today. As you wander back out into the night, the pyramid looms above you, less like a pile of stone and more like a frozen prayer. Every angle points not to earth, but to the sky. You run your fingers along the cool limestone and feel, faintly, that mix of ambition and faith. These weren't just builders, they were believers. And whether or not Pharaoh truly soared among the stars, his people believed he would. That belief, more than chisels or ropes, was the real cement. Without it, the stones would never have risen. You glance up one last time, imagining the pyramid glowing in moonlight, a stairway of stone that was also a stairway of dreams. The desert cools around you, but your mind feels anything but quiet. You've walked through ramps, quarries, tools, and sacred rituals, but there's still one towering puzzle left: the hidden chambers and secret passageways inside the pyramids. You stand at the base again, looking up at millions of tons of stone. And you realize, the real drama isn't only on the outside. It's buried in the heart of the pyramid, locked away in darkness where few eyes have ever seen. You slip into a narrow passage, ducking beneath massive stones. The air grows heavy, dusty, almost damp, and the walls press in close. Ancient graffiti still marks some surfaces, red ochre lines, names of work crews, directions for placement. You can almost hear a foreman shouting, "No, no, the block goes that way," in a voice that echoes through time. The sheer precision of the hidden spaces is staggering. Take the Grand Gallery, for instance, a soaring passage lined with corbelled stones, each layer jutting slightly inward until the ceiling vaults high above you. It looks more like a cathedral nave than a hallway carved for a tomb. Mainstream historians explain the gallery as a ramp system inside the pyramid, a channel used to maneuver granite blocks into the king's chamber. It's practical, efficient, and makes sense. But of course, others see something more mystical. The acoustics, again, are clap, and the sound rolls like thunder. Fringe voices whisper that it was meant as a chamber for sound resonance, amplifying chants or prayers. Historians still argue whether it was strictly functional or secretly ceremonial. Then you reach the king's chamber itself, lined with pink Aswan granite blocks so heavy that even cranes today would sweat to lift them. At the center lies the famous sarcophagus, empty, lidless, and strangely plain. No gold, no hieroglyphs, no decoration. Just a giant stone box that looks less like a royal coffin and more like a piece of minimalist IKEA furniture. Theories abound. Maybe looters stripped it bare. Maybe Pharaoh's body was never buried here. Or maybe the chamber was meant as something entirely different. You can almost feel the debates rattling in the air like whispers from unseen tour guides above the kings. Chamber are smaller hidden rooms, the so-called relieving. Chambers stacked with massive granite beams to disperse the weight of stone. Above? That's the practical explanation. But one quirky tidbit. In one of those chambers, explorers in the 1800s found ancient graffiti scrawled by the workers' crew names like the Gang of Khufu is drunk. Yes, even in the sacred heart of the Great Pyramid, someone left behind what amounts to ancient bathroom stall writing. It's oddly comforting to know sarcasm is timeless. Then there are the shafts, narrow, square tunnels angled upward from the king's and queen's chambers. Some align with stars like Orion's belt or Sirius. Others dead-end mysteriously. Were they ventilation shafts, escape routes for the soul, or just architectural features no one fully understands? Historians still argue whether they were spiritual, launch pads, or construction conveniences. In 1993, a robot sent into one shaft found a tiny door with copper handles, leading to, well, another small sealed chamber. Egyptologists joke that every time you open a door in a pyramid, you just find another door. Like a cosmic Matryoshka doll, but dustier. Even stranger are the hidden voids discovered recently with Mune scanning technology. Think of it like taking an X-ray of a mountain. Scientists in 2017 revealed a massive hollow space above the Grand Gallery, the size of a cathedral, sitting silently unknown for 4,500 years. No one knows what it's for. It could be a structural gap, a secret storage, or some yet unimagined ritual hall. Whatever it is, the pyramid just grew even more mysterious. And you thought your attic had weird surprises? You squeeze deeper into imagined side passages, where the air thins and your torchlight flickers. Some legends claim secret libraries are hidden within lost texts containing the wisdom of Atlantis, maps of the stars, or even instructions for humanity's destiny. Mainstream scholars dismiss these as fantasy, but the idea lingers like incense smoke. After all, if the Egyptians could hide giant chambers for millennia, what else might be buried in the stone? The deeper you wander, the more your mind spins. Every passage feels deliberate. Every angle whispers intent. Was this architecture or theology, engineering or magic? In truth, it was probably all of them at once. To the Egyptians, there was no dividing line between science and faith, between engineering and ritual. A chamber could serve both to hold granite beams and to echo the voices of priests. A shaft could vent stale air and carry a soul to Orion. You place your hand on the cool stone of a hidden wall. Knowing it's been untouched by human hands for thousands of years, silence is almost alive. In this darkness, the pyramid stops, being a tourist attraction, and becomes something else, a riddle written in stone, a message sent forward in time. Whether we've understood it or not, it's been waiting for us all along. And somewhere above you, the stars align, twinkling as if peeking down the shafts themselves. The pharaoh's spirit, whether goose or god, might still be flying among them, looking back at the pyramid as his eternal launch pad. You step back into the open night, the pyramid looming behind you like a stone mountain of unanswered questions. But instead of quiet resolution, your mind floods with all the alternative theories people have spun around these giant tombs or not tombs, depending on who you ask. It's like standing in front of a campfire where every storyteller is fighting to have the last word. First comes the wildest of them all, aliens. You've probably heard it before, gleaming spacecraft descending over the desert, extraterrestrials, handing blueprints to awestruck Egyptians. The reasoning? How could humans possibly move 70-ton blocks without cranes, forklifts, or a generous supply of Red Bull? Supporters point to star alignments and claim advanced cosmic knowledge. Couldn't belong to mere mortals. It's dramatic, sure, and makes for binge-worthy documentaries. But mainstream archaeologists roll their eyes so hard they probably get headaches. Still, fringe theorists argue, historians still debate whether the Egyptians could have achieved this with only manpower and simple tools. That tiny crack of uncertainty keeps the alien idea alive. Then there's the lost civilization hypothesis. Think Atlantis in the desert. Proponents suggest that an advanced human culture long vanished passed down the secrets of megalithic construction. They see connections between the pyramids and sites like Stonehenge, Teotihuacan, or even Easter Island, as if the ancients were part of one global engineering club. The quirky tidbit here: some maps from the Middle Ages depict pyramids alongside legends of sunken continents, blending fact with myth until it all feels like a fever dream. But not all alternative ideas drift into sci-fi. Some are more grounded, just unconventional. For example, one theory proposes that the pyramids weren't tombs at all, but giant machines designed to generate energy. Water channels, vibrations, and electromagnetic forces supposedly harnessed to produce power. Picture the Great Pyramid as a prehistoric Tesla coil. Mainstream historians say no evidence supports this, but the notion is seductive, especially when you're half asleep and staring at diagrams that look suspiciously like circuit boards. Others imagine the pyramids as giant calendars or astronomical observatories. The shafts, the alignments with Orion's belt, the way the base mirrors Earth's northern hemisphere curvature, all of it could be intentional. Historians still argue whether the builders meant to encode such cosmic precision, or if it's just clever coincidences we're now imposing. After all, humans love patterns. We see faces in toast and shapes in clouds. Why not constellations in stone? And then there's the mystical crowd, who claim the pyramids were designed as spiritual machines, devices, not for kings, but for consciousness. Some modern visitors swear they feel vibrations when they sit inside chambers, as though the stones hum with a frequency tuned to human thought. A few even report strange dreams or out-of-body experiences after spending a night within. Whether placebo, power of suggestion, or something else, it adds a whisper of magic to the silence. A more sober alternative says, maybe they were built by far fewer people than we think. Not 100,000 workers, but a smaller, more specialized workforce. Ancient graffiti, tool marks, and living quarters suggest skilled teams rotated seasonally, like construction crews with union shifts. It wasn't slaves whipped under the sun, it was proud Egyptians earning their keep. Their gang names scrawled onto blocks like Team Khufu. Quirky side note: one crew literally called themselves the Friends of Khufu, which sounds less like a work gang and more like a high school fan club. Another debate is about purpose. If they were tombs, why are so many burial chambers empty? Looting explains some, but others argue they were symbolic tombs, monuments to the pharaoh's soul rather than his body. Or maybe they doubled as both, practical burials and eternal stairways to the stars. Historians still argue whether Khufu was ever interred in his pyramid at all. His mummy has never been found. Even the construction method theories run like rival Netflix shows. One insists ramps stretched miles into the desert. Another swears spiral ramps wound around the pyramid itself. Some argue stones weren't hauled at all but cast in place from reconstituted limestone concrete, like pouring the world's hardest Lego set. That quirky detail that blocks might not be carved but molded still fuels late-night debates among engineers. If true, the pyramid was less of a quarry project and more of a giant chemistry experiment. You pause in the sand, imagining all these overlapping voices: aliens with laser tools, Atlanteans with wisdom scrolls, Egyptian gangs scribbling inside chambers, Pharaoh's soul hitching a ride on Orion's belt. It's chaotic, contradictory, and oddly comforting, because, maybe, the point isn't nailing down one single answer. Maybe the real magic is that 4,500 years later, the pyramids still invite endless wonder. They resist being solved, like a riddle that refuses to die. The desert wind kicks up, and the pyramid looms darker against the starry sky. You feel a shiver, not of fear, but of awe. Whatever theory you choose to lean on, the reality remains. Those stones are still standing. Through wars, earthquakes, storms, and generations of tourists with selfie sticks, the pyramids endure, and tomorrow, when the sun rises again over Giza, the debate will start fresh. Were they tombs, machines, monuments, or mysteries? All you know is that tonight, their stories carved into the dark, waiting for you to dream them your own way. You settle deeper into the night air, the pyramid silhouette pressing against the stars like a black triangle etched into forever. By now, you've wandered through sand-scorched quarries, clambered up ramps, peeked inside hidden shafts, and entertained theories from sensible to straight-out sci-fi. But one thing remains: the legacy these monuments have carved into humanity's imagination. Think about it when Napoleon first marched into Egypt in 1798. He famously stood before the pyramids and told his soldiers, "From the heights of these pyramids, 40 centuries look down upon you." Imagine the intimidation factor. Thousands of stone blocks stacked into a mountain, whispering to you, "I'll still be here long after you've had your croissant and coffee." A mainstream fact. That moment reignited Western obsession with Egypt, sparking Egyptomania that led to mummies in parlors, obelisks in city squares, and pyramid-shaped gravestones in quiet cemeteries. Even Las Vegas couldn't resist copying the design, though swapping limestone for neon lights is, well, a downgrade. You notice something else about the pyramids. They aren't just ancient relics, they're timeless blueprints for how we imagine eternity. Cultures across the globe have borrowed the pyramid shape, from Mayan temples to modern banks. Architects still argue whether the pyramid is simply the most stable structure nature allows, whether there's some subconscious pull in its form, as though our brains instinctively see it as a ladder to the heavens. Quirky tidbit: some people even build tiny cardboard pyramids at home, convinced the shape keeps fruit fresh longer. Does it work? Historians still argue whether it's physics or just wishful thinking. The legacy also seeps into language. Building. Your pyramid has become shorthand for tackling something monumental. We talk about pyramid schemes, the food pyramid, even pyramid workouts. It's like we can't resist sneaking that triangular metaphor into everyday life. And every time we do, we unknowingly tip our hat to those workers who sweated under the desert sun for millennia ago. But it's not just physical or culturalized spiritual, too. Standing here, you sense how the Egyptians believed their kings didn't just rule in life, but continued in death, guiding their people from the stars. The pyramids were cosmic anchors, a way to stitch heaven and earth together. You feel that lingering aura even now, like a faint charge in the air. And then there's the simple awe factor. You don't need a degree in archaeology to stand in front of a pyramid and feel small in the best way possible. These monuments have watched empires rise and fall, seen religions bloom and fade, outlasted droughts, plagues, revolutions, and endless waves of tourists fumbling with selfie sticks. Through it all, they remain patient, silent. UNBOTHERED. Remember when you trudged with the workers dragging those sledges, water splashing onto the sand to ease the pull? Or when you ducked into those narrow tunnels where air felt like stone soup? Or even when your brain flirted with alien architects and Atlantean engineers? All of that folds into the pyramid's legacy. Not just stones, but stories. And the stories keep multiplying. What's most comforting is this: you'll never fully solve it. Historians still argue whether Khufu's body was ever there, whether ramps stretched miles into the desert, whether some secret chamber still waits to be uncovered. And you You get to walk away knowing the mystery itself is part of the gift. The pyramid lingers in your vision, steady and unyielding, as if whispering, "I was built for eternity. Sleep well, wanderer. I'll be here when you wake." Now, let the desert quiet soften around you. The sand no longer scrapes beneath your sandals. The wind no longer tugs at your robes, it all slows. Like the world is folding itself into a gentler rhythm. Imagine the stones of the pyramid cooling in the night air, each block releasing the day's heat until it matches the calm of the sky above. You breathe deeper, and the weight of centuries drifts away. The voices of workers, engineers, pharaohs, and dreamers fade, leaving only a hush as steady as your heartbeat. The stars shimmer faintly, not as guides or riddles, but as distant lanterns keeping you company. Your mind loosens its grip on ramps, quarries, and debates. The pyramid doesn't ask for answers, it offers only its stillness. It's like a mountain, but one carved by human hands, reminding you that people can shape eternity from dust. That thought alone is enough to quiet the noise of the day. You stretch out on soft desert sand. The air is cool now, brushing your skin like silk. Somewhere far away, a camel sighs, but even that sound blends into the night, gentle and unhurried. Your eyelids grow heavier, not forced, just naturally closing, as though the dark itself is tucking you in. And as you drift, the pyramid becomes a dream, shape its angles softer, its presence lighter, its mystery less like a puzzle and more like a lullaby. You let yourself float inside that triangle of calm, knowing you don't need to climb or solve anything. You only need to rest. The stones will keep standing, the stars will keep shining, and you can finally let go. End of. Script, Sweet Dreams.